Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you're doing well. Today, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Jon Zaremba's second story collection called XLZABK002. And for simplicity, I believe he also refers to it as Book 2 or the Blue Book. Now, I think I'd like to try to give prospective readers an idea of what they could expect if they decide to give this one a try. And speaking of the 7 stories in general, I'll say you can expect a lot of genre elements. Sword and sorcery, certainly. There's a lot of science fiction. A lot of the stories are very action-packed. I would even say there's some elements of weird fiction. There might be some disagreement on that. I don't know what the definitions and categories formally are laid out as, but I've read some so-called weird fiction that I see some parallels with, so I'll go with that. But don't read this thinking that you're in for some fun romps that you'll read, have a good time with, and forget. These are very philosophical tales, very thoughtful foundation. In addition to them being interesting responses or even thematic inversions to stories from his previous collection, not that I think reading his previous collection is essential to understanding these, I think they all, to some extent, involve themes such as the power of consciousness, autonomy, certainly will, volition, determination, and they've lingered with me. They've left me thinking, which I consider a good thing. So, yeah, generally, I guess that's what I would say. I am going to break them down to some extent here. I'm not going to analyze them individually in great detail. I'm going to try to be somewhat representative. I don't want to completely show all the cards for prospective readers, but hopefully this will give you, once again, a taste of what can be expected if you give it a try. In my mind, at least, I link the 4 stories: continual self-exorcism, Prohairesis, monogenism, and Kathekon, mainly because they bring in pretty, I don't want to say traditional, but straightforward uses of those genre elements I discussed. Most of them are pretty action heavy. All involve the themes, but I'm going to single out Prohairesis because it's a longer story, and I think it's probably the best example of the themes I mentioned. Prohairesis is a story about a very isolated, insular, communal society called Acherona. And among our very communal Acheronas, we have a character named Wojtek, or Wojtek, I believe. You'll find a lot of Slavic influence in the names and folklore that appear in this story. But Wojtek is the proverbial nail who sticks up. He's very autonomous, very individualistic. This causes a lot of friction with his native society. And eventually, the cauldron boils over, so to speak, and he goes over the wall, literally and figuratively. He goes out to that mysterious land where naught but demons and death are thought to dwell. But what do you know, our Wojtek actually ends up becoming a very capable and self-sufficient individual. A lot of the qualities that his society considered sins, he is finding to be virtues. And he would probably be very satisfied in his new life if he didn't seem to be utterly alone in this world, aside from animals and the occasional Yeti-like creature. So he decides to return to his native home, hopefully to share the word that his people too can be fulfilled individuals out there in this grand, wider world. And the confrontation that results is perhaps predictably brutal. But I think the thing that puzzled me, and this is where the thing with the stories lingering applies, Wojtek's people seem to have suffered by his absence even before the brutal confrontation I discussed. There's probably a symbolic meaning to that. I have some ideas about that. I won't impose them upon a prospective reader. But in any case, there is a much more obvious detriment to Wojtek's people after the confrontation, and things don't end so well for them, but Wojtek might be in for a pleasant surprise when he finally departs for good. So, yeah, that's a long story. I kind of see it as representative of the collection's themes, like I said. Another of that group of 4 stories I'd like to single out is Kathekon, just because it includes one of my favorite characters of the collection. That character is one Saflieni. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And Saflieni is a Atlantean, I suppose, mage. At least I think he's supposed to be from Atlantis. He is the last living representative of a all but extinct civilization. That's the salient point. But he finds himself imprisoned in a hypogeum. Anybody familiar with geography might have bells ringing at this point. But yeah, he finds himself imprisoned under guard in the Bronze Age Mediterranean. And let's just say that through will and an ability of manifestation, he discovers his guard's fundamental weakness and is able to exploit that as an escape. Now, I wouldn't call Saflieni a hero. Shoot, I'm not even sure I'd call him an anti-hero. He might just be a downright villain. But what can I say? I kind of liked him regardless. You might even say he made off with my heart in a way. Haha. But yeah, interesting enough, his guard's fundamental weakness was duty, a devotion to duty. Now, I think the author intends duty in the uncritical, unthinking sense of duty, in the there's not to question why, there's but to do and die sense. That might make some readers uncomfortable. It made me a little uncomfortable at first. That's something else I'll say about the collection in general. I often found the ideals and actions of the characters did not necessarily align with my own, but I was always fascinated. I was always along for the ride. So, yeah, this is definitely for readers who enjoy a challenging read. I'll put it that way. But yeah, I single out Kathekon because I dig Saflieni. Okay, the collection ends with a little piece called Hierogamy. And this is really, I guess I call it a little allegory. It's almost poetic. And it's very much an inversion of the final piece in Mr. Zaremba's first collection. But this was interesting to me because a pair of gods, if you will, grow disappointed and weary of their creation, and through a ritualistic act of consummation, they bring about annihilation. Now, I guess that interested me because I've read stories where there's a cosmogony that happens through a coital act, but I think this might be the first time I've encountered that sort of act bringing on destruction. I guess it's kind of the Eros and Thanatos principles all in one. But yeah, it was really resonant, interesting way to end the collection. Really leaves you on a elegiac note, I guess. So, yeah. The biggest departure of not only this collection, I'd say of all of Jon Zaremba's writing I've encountered so far is Mayberry romance. And I was a little worried here because considering the content of many of his other stories, maybe especially his vigilante romance from his first collection, I was a little worried about what might happen to the beloved characters of Mayberry, North Carolina, that he borrows for this piece, but it actually turns out to be a very heartwarming coming-of-age story, and the residents of Mayberry are very much honored. So, yeah, no complaints on that front. I I can't say it was probably my favorite story of the collection, but it's well done. It's charming. And like I said, it's downright warm and cuddly compared to most of Zaremba's work. So yeah, it's definitely the standout. And last, I'm going to talk about Subjugate the Cosmos. It's told within the frame of a letter and premonition and even a dream. But at its heart, it's basically a alien contact story, which you might be thinking, okay, your typical sci-fi elements. But the reason I single this one out is it brings a real touch of absurdist humor, which I love that sort of thing. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say this was definitely my favorite as a collection, but I really love the humor element. And let's just say you get hilariously cliched, bog standard aliens, so to speak, who don't understand the role they're supposed to play. And then you get highly advanced, almost transcendent aliens who are begging to be subjugated, if only so they can have some sense of what it's like to live again, I suppose you can say. So, yeah, I like this one. I very much hope that in the future, Jon Zaremba might consider writing more absurdism. I think he has a gift for it. So, I guess that's all I have to say. I don't know how much this would help prospective readers. I'm not sure I can even make much of what I just spewed forth, but if you're looking for additional information, I will link Jon Zaremba's YouTube page below. He posted several videos where he goes into some detail about each of these stories, much more articulately than I ever could. So with that, I believe I will trail off here. If you decide to pick these up, I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. So, till I speak with you again, take care. Later days.
But am I not turtly enough for the Turtle Club?